The title of Our Lady of Divine Providence immediately places us before one of the deepest mysteries of the love of God, the certainty that He guides all things, even when we do not understand the paths by which we are led. In contemplating Mary under this title, the Church invites us to dive into the absolute trust that she had in the Father, a trust so great that it transformed every event of her life into the perfect fulfillment of the divine will. From the moment of the Annunciation, when the angel greeted her with words that had never before been addressed to a human being, to the most hidden episodes of her simple daily life in Nazareth, Mary always walked supported by providence. Thus, venerating her as Our Lady of Divine Providence means welcoming the truth that the same hand that guided her life continues to guide ours, especially in the moments when everything seems out of control or uncertain. The heart of this title rests on the fact that Mary, being the mother of the incarnate Word, participated more intimately than any creature in the divine economy of salvation. Nothing in her life happened by chance. Every gesture, every silence, every journey, and every suffering was united to the saving plan of the Father. When we contemplate her in this way, we understand that true devotion to divine providence inevitably passes through trust in the intercession of Mary, because she is the woman who never doubted the faithfulness of God, even when everything around her indicated the contrary. That is why so many Catholics turn to her with confidence, especially in times of material, emotional, or spiritual need, certain that just as she cared for the Holy Family in its concrete challenges, she will also care for our afflictions with the tenderness of a mother who places everything in the hands of God. Marian devotion under this title began to gain strength, especially between the 16th and 17th centuries, when numerous religious and faithful witnessed extraordinary graces attributed to the help of Mary. However, its spiritual roots are much older, for already in the first centuries, the Church recognized her as the one who cooperated in the salvation of men by her obedience, as St. Irenaeus taught. This obedience was not just a momentary act during the Annunciation. It was a continuous choice, renewed day after day, which transformed her life into a path of total abandonment to divine providence. When the Christian meditates on this, it becomes evident that Our Lady of Divine Providence is model and help not only for those who ask for material favors, but mainly for those who seek to remain faithful to the designs of God in the face of the inevitable difficulties of life. The traditional image of Our Lady of Divine Providence presents her holding the child Jesus with delicacy, while He extends His hand to the people as one who distributes graces and blessings. This iconography conveys a profound theological message. Mary is the maternal mediatrix who presents Jesus to us, the true source of all providence. Nothing is more providential in God's plan than Christ Himself, the supreme gift given for the salvation of humanity. Therefore, whoever contemplates this image learns that to ask for Mary's intercession is not to turn away from God, but to draw even closer to Him, for it is through her that providence willed to come into the world. Thus, before this representation, the faithful are led to an attitude of serene trust, recognizing that nothing is lacking to those who live under the tender gaze of the Mother of the Savior. The detailed emergence of this devotion is also intertwined with moments of great need in the history of the Church. In times of plague, famine, or political persecutions, countless faithful found strength and hope by invoking Our Lady of Divine Providence. Historical accounts tell of entire communities which, in seeking refuge under this Marian title, experienced concrete signs of God's assistance. These stories contributed to consolidating the understanding that Mary is not only spiritual consolation, but a true cooperator in human sufferings, capable of moving the hearts of the faithful to a trusting abandonment in the Father. This shows how the devotion flourished, especially in contexts of trial, revealing that in the darkest moments, divine providence never abandons those who place themselves under the intercession of Mary. When we analyze the life of Mary from the perspective of divine providence, we perceive concrete episodes that perfectly illustrate her capacity to trust in God. The flight into Egypt, for example, was a circumstance that demanded from her and from Joseph an unshakable faith, leaving everything behind, departing in haste and surviving in a foreign land. Even so, at no moment do we see Mary in despair or questioning the ways of the Lord. She goes forward with firmness, knowing that the God who sends the command is the same who prepares the means to fulfill it. This silent attitude, profoundly contemplative and totally surrendered to the divine will, becomes a foundation for the spirituality of Christians who face tribulations and need to remember that, just as the Father sustained the Holy Family, He will also sustain each one of us. Another essential facet of this devotion is the certainty that Mary, as Mother of Divine Providence, cares not only for the material needs of her children, but also, and above all, for their spiritual needs. How many times does the human heart ask God for immediate solutions, without understanding that He has a plan much greater and deeper than we are able to perceive? Mary, who lived fully united to the divine will, teaches us to trust even when the answers seem delayed. It is as if her maternal voice said to each faithful, "My child, wait, trust, rest. God is preparing something that you have not yet been able to see." This spiritual dimension of providence is fundamental, for it helps us to perceive that God's true care goes far beyond external conditions and reaches the depths of our soul. The title of Our Lady of Divine Providence also has a profoundly Trinitarian character. When we invoke Mary in this way, we do not do so as if we were attributing to her the role of the Father, but because we recognize in her the creature who most perfectly cooperated with the Trinitarian plan of love. The Father entrusted to her His only begotten Son. The Son made her His mother. The Holy Spirit overshadowed her with His power. The whole life of Mary is a hymn to the Trinitarian action of God, and therefore her maternal care is a direct reflection of that love which comes from God, one and triune. Thus, when we seek her in our needs, we are not turning to an autonomous power, but asking the one who lives totally united to the will of the Father to intercede for us before the source of all providence. It is also very significant to note that the devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence invites the Christian to a spirituality of hope. We live in a world marked by uncertainties, economic crises, illnesses, and emotional instability. Faced with these realities, many can be tempted to discouragement, believing that God is distant or indifferent. Mary, however, appears as a luminous sign that divine providence never abandons her children. Her tender gaze and welcoming posture reveal that Christian hope is not illusory, but founded on the certainty that God is constantly acting in history and in the life of each person. In this way, Mary becomes for us not only an icon of consolation, but a living call to persevering trust. Finally, this first part of the script wishes to prepare the heart of the faithful to understand that devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence is not a secondary devotion within Catholic spirituality. On the contrary, it touches the deepest core of faith, absolute trust in the love of God. Mary is the perfect mirror of this trust, and it is through her that we learn to walk in the certainty that, even when everything seems lost, God continues to direct every detail of our life. Everyone who looks to Mary with faith perceives that divine providence never fails, never delays, and never abandons. This truth, which has sustained the saints throughout the centuries, can also radically transform our own history if we open our hearts to welcome the intercession of the one whom God chose as Mother of His Son and Mother of the Church. In contemplating Our Lady of Divine Providence, it is impossible to ignore the great mystery of her hidden life in Nazareth, a silent period that extraordinarily reveals how God acts in small things. Most of Mary's earthly existence was not marked by spectacular miracles or extraordinary events, but by a simple daily life made up of work, prayer, and family care. And yet, it was precisely in this silence that divine providence manifested itself with greatest intensity. Mary lived every gesture, from preparing food to teaching Jesus to walk, with the certainty that God was guiding everything. This aspect of the devotion teaches us that providence does not manifest itself only in great moments, but above all in daily routine, where God shapes our soul without our noticing it. Thus, venerating Mary under this title is learning to see the hand of God in the apparently ordinary realities of life. It is striking to note how Mary, even though she was the Mother of God, embraced normality with humility and love, without ever demanding supernatural privileges. She knew that divine providence acts both in miracles and in discretion. In Nazareth, the Holy Family experienced financial difficulties, manual labor, and the need to organize the home, concrete dimensions of human life that show that providence does not eliminate effort, but accompanies and fructifies it. Mary, as Mother of Divine Providence, teaches us that trusting in God does not mean folding our arms, but doing everything within our reach while placing in the hands of the Father that which escapes our control. In this way, her daily life becomes a beacon for all those who need to reconcile faith, work, and family. Another reality deeply marked by providence is the fact that Mary always saw in adverse events an opportunity to unite her heart to God's plan. When the child Jesus was lost in the temple, for example, Mary experienced real anguish, a pain similar to that which any mother would feel upon losing a child. However, even in that distress, she did not allow fear to obscure her trust in the Father. Upon finding him again, she heard mysterious words that perhaps she did not fully understand, but she kept everything in her heart, trusting that God would clarify it in due time. This interior attitude is the essence of Marian life, trusting in providence without demanding immediate explanations. Every Christian who faces disconcerting situations is invited to imitate this posture, allowing himself to be guided more by faith than by the need for answers. Divine providence also reveals itself in an impressive way in the relationship between Mary and St. Joseph. God united these two hearts in a perfect way, granting them complementary missions and sustaining them at every moment. Mary knew that Joseph was part of the divine plan, and therefore she surrendered with trust to the path God was preparing through him. The flight into Egypt, the return to Nazareth, and the hard work of each day were lived in the certainty that God was guiding every step. To venerate Our Lady of Divine Providence is also to remember that God acts through concrete people whom He places in our path to protect, guide, and help us. In this dimension, the devotion awakens in us gratitude for the people whom God uses as instruments of care and protection. It is also significant to reflect on Mary's matured faith throughout her life. Although she was conceived without sin, Mary was not born with full knowledge of all divine mysteries. She grew in faith, guided by providence that gently molded her soul. This means that divine providence not only supplies external needs, but works inwardly, transforming the human heart so that it corresponds evermore to God's plan. In Mary, we see the model of a soul that lets itself be gently led by divine action, allowing God to perfect it in the details. This aspect is especially consoling, for it reveals that even we, fragile and sinful, can learn to trust more and more, knowing that God helps us to mature with patience and love. Mary's hidden life is also a testimony to the importance of silent obedience. At a time when many allow themselves to be carried away by the need for recognition and visibility, Mary teaches us that holiness blossoms precisely in discretion. She never sought glory or applause. On the contrary, she serenely accepted the mission of serving in anonymity. This attitude is not weakness, but deep trust that God sees what no one sees and rewards what is born of humility. Our Lady of Divine Providence invites us to let go of the need to control everything and to accept that many spiritual fruits are generated in the simplicity of hidden gestures where only God observes. She shows us that true greatness lies in allowing Providence to act without resistance. Another point that deserves emphasis is how Providence manifests itself in Mary's care for the poor, the needy, and the afflicted. Although she lived in simple conditions, she never closed herself off in her own reality. On the contrary, her home was always a place of welcome, mercy, and listening. Mary did not yet perform visible material miracles in her youth, but she already radiated a presence capable of consoling and lifting up those who suffered. Providence, before being an external intervention, is an inner movement that awakens sensitivity towards one's neighbor. Thus, to invoke Our Lady of Divine Providence is also to ask for the grace to be instruments of God's care in the lives of others, making our simple gestures channels of divine tenderness. It is equally admirable to perceive that Mary lived her trust in Providence not as a sentimental attitude, but as something profoundly rational and conscious. She knew who God was, knew his faithfulness through the scriptures, and was fully certain that he never abandons those who seek him. Her faith, therefore, was founded on truth and sustained by the memory of God's works. This teaches us that trusting in Providence does not mean closing our eyes to reality, but seeing it in the light of God's promises. Mary, Mother of Divine Providence, invites us to cultivate a mature faith capable of facing challenges with serenity, because it is firmly based on the certainty that God remains present even when invisible. Mary's life also shows that divine providence knows how to transform what is small into something great. God chose an unknown young woman from a simple village to accomplish the most extraordinary work in history, the incarnation of the Word. Nothing in her social condition indicated greatness in human eyes, but providence sees beyond appearances. This reveals that God often chooses what is humble to confound what is powerful, and Mary is the greatest example of this. To contemplate Our Lady of Divine Providence is to accept that God accomplishes great things in our lives precisely when we recognize ourselves as small and dependent. He does not need human greatness, but docile hearts. Concluding this second part, we realize that Mary lived in perfect form, that which all of us are called to live, total surrender to the will of God. Her life in Nazareth is a silent manual of the action of providence, a constant invitation to trust, humility, patience, and trusting abandonment. Everything in her points to the loving action of God, who directs history in an invisible yet most powerful way. In diving into devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence, we learn that the secret of true peace lies precisely in surrendering ourselves to the maternal care of Mary, who leads us to the heart of the Father with tenderness and security. In deepening devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence, it is essential to understand what it truly means to trust in divine providence in our daily life. Many imagine providence as an extraordinary intervention of God that always resolves our problems immediately. But Catholic spirituality teaches us something quite different. Providence is the loving, continuous, and silent action of God, who guides all things for the good of those who love him, even though we do not fully understand his ways. Mary is the perfect model of this mature trust, for she lived her entire life sustained by this profound certainty that God never errs, never abandons, and never ceases to act. To contemplate her under this title is therefore to learn to see in the apparent chaos of life the loving order of the Father who governs all things with infinite wisdom. In Christian spirituality, trusting in God's providence does not mean denying difficulties, but facing them with a supernatural outlook. Mary faced intense pains, poverty, persecution, uncertainties, dangerous journeys, the temporary loss of her son, and finally, the lacerating pain of Calvary. In none of these situations did she become discouraged or doubt God's love. On the contrary, her faith became stronger the closer she came to the cross. This reveals that divine providence does not avoid trials, but transforms them into a path of sanctification and spiritual maturity. Thus, when we turn to Our Lady of Divine Providence, we ask not only for human solutions, but also for the grace to see the hand of God in everything, including in situations that seem contrary to our desires. Devotion to divine providence helps us to understand that God sees far beyond what we see, and that He often leads us along unexpected paths to preserve us from greater evils or to prepare us for higher missions. Mary lived this in every stage of her existence, in the simplicity of the Annunciation, in the urgency of the flight into Egypt, in the silent return to Nazareth, and on the painful way to Calvary. Nothing escaped the eyes of the one who governs all things, and Mary knew this with absolute clarity. This inner serenity, nourished by total abandonment to the divine will, is an invitation for us also to accept God's surprising paths. Many times, that which today causes us suffering will, in the future, be a reason for gratitude, because God writes our history with wisdom far greater than we can imagine. Another essential truth about divine providence is that it never contradicts itself. God does not act chaotically or in contradiction. He is coherent, faithful, and absolutely reliable. Mary understood this truth like no one else, and therefore she never hesitated before the apparent contradictions in her own story. When she heard Simeon announce that a sword would pierce her soul, she did not rebel, but accepted the prophecy with humility. When Jesus stated in the temple that he had to be about his Father's business, she did not contest. She simply kept everything in her heart. This docility before the mysteries is what makes her our mother and teacher in the experience of providence. She shows us that trusting in God does not demand understanding everything, but believing that He knows exactly what He is doing. The spirituality of divine providence also involves the exercise of patience. God has His own time, and His time is perfect. Many times, human haste produces unnecessary suffering because we want God to act according to our schedules and expectations. Mary, however, knew how to wait. She waited for the fulfillment of the promises of the Old Testament, waited for the growth of the child Jesus, waited silently for the beginning of His public life, and waited with unconditional love at the foot of the cross. Devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence teaches that Christian patience is not passivity, but active trust, which remains firm even in the face of long periods of God's silence. This kind of patience completely transforms spiritual life, because it makes us realize that providence does not fail. It acts at the exact time. Furthermore, divine providence is not limited to material care, although it also includes it. Many faithful turn to Our Lady of Divine Providence in times of financial crisis, unemployment, lack of resources, or urgent needs, and countless testimonies confirm that Mary intercedes with great power in these situations. However, her maternal care goes far beyond external needs. She also cares for our conversion, our spiritual growth, our emotional health, and the healing of internal wounds that we often carry hidden. Mary's greatest desire is that each one of her children be saved and find true peace in God. In invoking her under this title, we learn to ask not only for what we need, but for that which will truly lead us to heaven. Another precious teaching of this devotion is that divine providence acts with gentleness, but also with firmness. God does not force us to follow him, but discreetly guides each step. If we stray from the path, he corrects us. If we hesitate, he strengthens us. If we fall, he lifts us up. Mary, who experienced this loving guidance in the most perfect way, desires to teach her children to perceive the signs of God's presence throughout life. Often the events that we judge to be negative are, in fact, great manifestations of providence, preparing us for something better. Devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence opens our spiritual eyes to see this divine pedagogy, allowing us to interpret our history with more wisdom and less anxiety. It is also important to emphasize that trusting in providence demands a profound act of humility. It is to recognize that we are not capable of directing our lives on our own, that our strength is limited, and that we need the constant help of God. Mary lived this humility fully. She never sought protagonism or control over events. Her entire life was a hymn of trusting abandonment. When we venerate her under the title of Our Lady of Divine Providence, we ask precisely for this grace, to renounce excessive self-sufficiency and allow God to guide us gently. Humility opens doors that pride would never be able to open, and it is for this reason that Mary is so effective in her intercession. Her humility made her totally available to God's plans. Divine providence also calls us to cultivate a life of profound gratitude. Those who trust in providence learn to recognize not only great miracles, but also the small blessings of each day, understanding that everything is a gift. Mary lived in this gratitude constantly, for she knew that every event, even the challenging ones, was an expression of God's love. In her soul there was no room for complaints or rebellion, only for silent praise. In turning to Our Lady of Divine Providence, we are invited to develop this inner attitude of gratitude, which transforms the way we see life and strengthens our faith. Gratitude is the key that opens the human heart to the action of providence, because it makes us aware of the wonders that God has already accomplished for us. Concluding this third part, we can affirm that devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence is more than a plea for material help. It is a school of deep spirituality which shapes the heart to trust, to wait, and to love as Mary loved. It is an invitation to see life through the eyes of faith, recognizing that God governs everything with infinite wisdom. As we walk beside Mary, we are led to a deeper understanding that nothing happens by chance, and that everything, absolutely everything, can be transformed into grace when placed in the hands of divine providence. This truth, lived and witnessed by the saints, is now offered to us through the mother who never abandons her children. Over the centuries, devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence has been accompanied by countless testimonies of miracles and extraordinary graces, especially in moments of extreme need. These accounts are not mere pious stories, but concrete reflections of the loving action of God who acts through the intercession of Mary. When the Church recognizes miracles attributed to the Mother of Divine Providence, she's not overvaluing the figure of Mary, but reaffirming God's will to act through her, just as he has done since the beginning of the history of salvation. These testimonies offer the faithful a horizon of hope, showing that even when everything seems lost in human eyes, God continues silently guiding events and pouring out his grace through the mother who never abandons her own. One of the most striking historical episodes related to this devotion occurred in the 16th century, when religious and faithful living in times of great material scarcity turned to the intercession of Mary under this title. There are reports of entire communities that, after praying fervently, found unexpected supplies, food that appeared in a providential way, and donations that arrived without human explanation. These material miracles must not be seen as coincidences, but as concrete signs of God's solicitude for his children. Mary, as Mother of Divine Providence, acts precisely in these moments, guiding circumstances in such a way that the need is supplied. Such accounts not only strengthen the faith of believers, but also inspire deep trust in the powerful intercession of the Mother of the Lord. Another impressive testimony of the action of Our Lady of Divine Providence is found in the life of peoples persecuted and experiencing grave social difficulties. In situations of political instability, famine, war, or religious persecution, many faithful found in devotion to the Mother of Providence a source of strength and courage. There are records of people who, upon consecrating themselves to Mary under this title, were protected from imminent dangers, escaped mortal situations, or found unexpected solutions to apparently insoluble dilemmas. These facts show that divine providence is not limited to material sustenance, but also manifests itself as protection, discernment, and interior strength in the face of the harshest trials. Mary appears in these episodes as a true pillar of support, leading her children away from evil and sustaining them with maternal love. Devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence is also accompanied by miracles of physical and spiritual healing. Many faithful report that in turning to Mary with trust and perseverance, they received graces of restored health, both bodily and emotional. There are stories of people with illnesses considered irreversible who experienced relief or healing after placing their lives in the hands of Mary, recognizing in her a channel of divine mercy. However, perhaps even more frequent than physical healings are the inner transformations, changes of life, family reconciliations, profound conversions, deliverance from addictions, and healing of traumas that previously seemed impossible. These graces testify to the silent yet most powerful action of divine providence, which, through Mary, restores the human heart and leads it to a new path of holiness. There are also impressive accounts of religious communities that experience the concrete assistance of the Mother of Divine Providence. In convents and monasteries that lived through moments of extreme poverty, it is common to find stories in which, after fervent prayer, food miraculously appeared at the door, donations arrived at the exact moment, or material help emerged without explanation. These narratives, recorded in the biographies of saints and in monastic chronicles, reveal that God cares in a special way for those who dedicate their lives entirely to Him. The Mother of Divine Providence, as guardian of these consecrated souls, never allows that what is essential for the mission be lacking. These testimonies strengthen our faith and teach us that absolute trust in providence is not an illusion, but a safe path for those who surrender themselves to God through Mary. Among the most moving miracles attributed to Our Lady of Divine Providence are those related to family reconciliation. How many homes divided by quarrels, misunderstandings, and estrangement have found healing and unity after turning to the intercession of the Mother of Providence? Mary, as Mother of the Church and mediatrix of peace, acts in a special way when it comes to restoring wounded bonds. Her maternal touch is capable of softening hardened hearts, inspiring forgiveness, and bringing back lost harmony. These testimonies show that divine providence also acts in human relationships, rebuilding what seemed irreparably destroyed and bringing forth the peace that only God's love can grant. Another area in which the intercession of the Mother of Divine Providence manifests itself strongly is in the lives of the unemployed, the indebted, and those who face desperate financial difficulties. Many faithful testify that, when they began to pray the novena of divine providence, or to ask Mary's help with sincere faith, unexpected doors were opened, jobs appeared, debts were resolved, opportunities arose seemingly out of nowhere. These testimonies do not promise riches, but confirm that God never abandons those who place their trust in Mary. Providence acts in a concrete and surprising way, especially when the heart that asks is open to the divine will and is willing to walk in uprightness. There are also significant reports related to protection in accidents, natural disasters, and situations of extreme danger. Many devotees affirm that they were preserved from sudden death, serious accidents, or tragic events after invoking the Mother of Divine Providence. In some cases, the protection was so evident that even people without faith recognized that there was something supernatural at work. These testimonies are particularly touching because they reveal that divine providence, through Mary, acts not only in the invisible but also in the concrete, preserving lives and offering sensible signs of God's love. They remind us that even when we have no control over events, we can trust in the care of the One who constantly watches over us. It's important to note that the miracles attributed to Our Lady of Divine Providence do not arise in isolation, but are part of a long tradition of the Church that recognizes Mary's active participation in the work of salvation. Since the wedding at Cana, where she interceded for the needy couple, we see that her mission is to present human needs to the Son, trusting fully in His mercy. All the miracles that happen through her intercession are, in essence, an extension of that first gesture. Mary perceives our lacks, presents them to her Son, and receives from Him the necessary grace. Thus, the testimonies accumulated throughout the centuries do nothing but confirm what Scripture itself has already revealed. Mary is truly the mother who cares, intercedes, and leads her children to the merciful heart of God. Concluding this fourth part, we realize that the miracles related to Our Lady of Divine Providence are not just extraordinary phenomena, but signs of the love of God that acts through the Mother whom He chose to be the channel of His grace. Each testimony, each story of overcoming, each healing, and each reconciliation reveals that divine providence is not an abstract idea, but a living reality, active and deeply close to us. In turning to Mary with trust and perseverance, we enter into the inexhaustible current of divine mercy, which never ceases to act. This certainty prepares us to understand even more deeply, in the next parts, the spiritual role of this devotion for the Church and for each faithful who places himself under the protective mantle of the Mother of Providence. Devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence occupies a special place in the heart of the Church, for it expresses in a profound way the absolute trust that the Christian must place in the love of the Father. From the earliest centuries, the Church recognized in Mary not only the Mother of the Savior, but also the Mother who accompanies and spiritually sustains the people of God on their journey. Under the title of Divine Providence, this maternal mission is revealed in all its fullness because it reminds us that Mary is continually interceding for us, presenting to God our needs, pains, and hopes. Thus, this devotion is not just an isolated devotional practice, but a living expression of the faith of the Church, which recognizes in the Mother of Jesus the perfect icon of trust in divine providence and the most effective intercessor before the throne of grace. Throughout history, various popes have encouraged devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence, recognizing in her a sure support for the spiritual and material needs of the faithful. Among them stands out Pope Benedict XIV, who showed great love for this Marian title and confirmed its spiritual importance. The Church, in promoting this devotion, does not seek to establish a figure parallel to Christ, but rather to strengthen in the faithful the conviction that God acts in a singular way through Mary. When the liturgy, tradition, or magisterium emphasize Mary's role in the economy of salvation, they are reaffirming what is already evident in Scripture. God chose to act through her and continues to do so throughout the centuries. In convents, monasteries, and religious communities, devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence has always occupied a place of prominence. Many religious orders have her as a special patroness, especially those that depend entirely on charity for their sustenance. Religious who live vows of poverty witness in a particularly profound way the constant care of Mary. They understand that divine providence often manifests itself in a simple way: food that arrives at the exact moment, unexpected help, an opportunity for service that opens doors. Mary's presence in these environments is almost palpable, for she appears as the mother who cares, who accompanies, and who never allows that what is truly necessary be lacking. In parish life, devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence also flourishes strongly. In many communities, there are feasts, novenas, processions, and prayer groups dedicated to this Marian title. These moments of communal faith help the faithful to strengthen their trust in God and to perceive that divine providence is present in the life of the community. The parish, as a spiritual family, learns from Mary to live in unity, to share gifts, to face difficulties with hope, and to support the most needy. Thus, the devotion is not limited to the personal sphere, but expands to the collective, becoming a source of spiritual and social renewal. Devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence also manifests itself in a profound way in the liturgy of the Church. Although it is not a universal solemnity, there are votive masses, specific prayers, and proper celebrations that invite the faithful to meditate on the role of Mary as mediatrix of graces and cooperator in the divine work. These liturgical celebrations reinforce the truth that God's providence is a mystery that permeates all things, from creation to redemption, from the birth to the death of each Christian. In taking part in these celebrations, the faithful are invited to renew their trust in God, entrusting their needs to Mary and welcoming the maternal care that she offers. Another important aspect of this devotion is personal consecration to Our Lady of Divine Providence. Many faithful choose to consecrate their lives, families, work, and projects into Mary's hands, recognizing that she leads everything to the heart of God. Consecration is not a magical gesture, but a profound act of faith and surrender that transforms the heart and directs life toward the divine will. In consecrating oneself to the Mother of Providence, the Christian recognizes his own fragility and publicly declares that he wishes to live under the constant care of God, mediated by the intercession of Mary. This practice has generated extraordinary spiritual fruits throughout history, transforming lives and leading countless people on the path to holiness. It is also noteworthy how this devotion relates to the missionary nature of the Church. Mary, as Mother of Providence, accompanies missionaries, catechists, preachers, and all those who proclaim the gospel throughout the world. In poor, distant, or persecuted regions, Our Lady of Divine Providence becomes a concrete sign of hope for Christians who struggle to keep the faith alive. Many missionaries testify that they felt her care in times of danger, hunger, loneliness, and risk. Mary's presence strengthens courage and inspires the fearless proclamation of the Word of God, showing that divine providence never abandons those who work for the salvation of souls. Devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence also has a profound impact on family spirituality. Families that cultivate this devotion learn to place their problems in God's hands, to face difficulties with serenity, and to trust that Mary will intercede for their needs. In a time marked by family crises, conflicts, lack of dialogue, and economic challenges, this devotion arises as a safe refuge. Families that pray together to Our Lady of Divine Providence discover that peace returns to the home, that unexpected doors are opened, and that difficult decisions become clearer. Mary, as mother and educator of Christian families, teaches that trust in providence is the path to stability and harmony within the home. Another fundamental element of this devotion is that it awakens in the faithful the virtue of charity. Those who trust in providence learn to be providence for others. Mary, who cared for Jesus and Joseph with total love, inspires her devotees to offer concrete help to those in need. For this reason, in many communities that cultivate this devotion, works of charity arise naturally. Food drives, acts of welcome, mercy toward the sick, support for poor families. Devotion thus translates into concrete works of love, revealing that true spirituality always leads to charity. Concluding this fifth part, we can affirm that devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence is not just a beautiful title or a pious tradition, but a profound expression of the faith of the Church. It unites theology, spirituality, history, and practical life in a single movement of surrender and trust. In contemplating Mary under this title, we are invited to rediscover the beauty of placing ourselves in the hands of God, who directs everything with love. The Church, throughout the centuries, has recognized in this devotion a safe path to lead the faithful to spiritual maturity and holiness, because it teaches us to live with serenity, knowing that God takes care of everything through the Mother whom He gave us at the foot of the cross. Living devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence in daily life is, above all, to cultivate a deep relationship with God through the unshakable trust that Mary teaches us. This devotion is not limited to formal moments of prayer or festive celebrations, but manifests itself in the way we face each daily challenge, whether in family, professional, or spiritual life. For many faithful, trusting in providence seems something distant, almost impossible in a world marked by rush, anxiety, and the constant feeling of loss of control. However, Mary's example shows us that living under divine providence is not a spiritual utopia, but a concrete choice that transforms the heart and illumines the path. The devotion becomes real when we learn to entrust every situation, great or small, to God's care, knowing that Mary accompanies and intercedes for us with maternal solicitude. One of the most effective ways of living this devotion is through daily prayer. Prayer must not be seen as a mere repetition of words, but as an encounter with God in the silence of the soul, where we can express our needs, sufferings, doubts, and thanksgiving. To pray to Our Lady of Divine Providence means to open the heart to the Mother who knows our pains deeply and desires to lead us to the Father. Many people find consolation in praying the Novena of Divine Providence, a traditional practice that strengthens trust in God's love and recalls daily that nothing is lacking to those who trust in Mary. However, beyond formal prayers, it is essential to learn to lift the heart to God at any moment of the day, whether before an important decision, in the face of an unexpected problem, or even in the small joys of everyday life. Another fundamental aspect of practical devotion is active trust, which is distinct from passive or naive trust. Trusting in providence does not mean folding our arms and waiting for God to solve everything magically. On the contrary, true trust impels us to act, knowing that God blesses our efforts and completes what we cannot accomplish alone. Mary lived this active trust in Nazareth, working, serving, and making decisions, always guided by the Holy Spirit. In the same way, the devotee of the Mother of Divine Providence is called to act with prudence, responsibility, and faith, entrusting the results to God without anxiety. This attitude engenders a surprising interior freedom, because it frees the heart from the need to control everything and allows God to guide the unfolding of life with perfect wisdom. It is also important to learn to interpret events in the light of divine providence. Often events that seem negative or frustrating are, in fact, God's instruments to protect us, correct us, strengthen us, or prepare us for something greater. The Christian who lives this devotion learns to ask, "What is God teaching me through this?" Or "How can I grow spiritually with this situation?" This way of seeing life does not eliminate suffering, but gives it meaning. Mary, who knew how to keep and ponder in her heart everything that happened, is the model of this spiritual reading of events. She shows us that nothing is random for those who live under the loving gaze of divine providence. Living devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence also requires cultivating patience, a virtue often forgotten in our time. Christian patience is not passive resignation, but persevering trust. It is knowing how to wait for God's time without becoming discouraged, without complaining, and without trying to hasten what only providence can resolve. Mary waited for years for the fulfillment of divine promises, walked in silence when she did not fully understand the designs of the Father, and remained firm even in the face of the greatest sufferings. Following her example is accepting that some answers will only be revealed in due time. And while we wait, God works silently in our hearts, preparing us to receive what we ask for or what He knows is best for us. Gratitude is also an indispensable element in living this devotion. Many faithful turn to God only to ask, but forget to give thanks for the countless gifts they have already received. Gratitude opens our eyes to recognize the constant action of providence, even in the simplest details of daily life. When we give thanks, our soul expands and becomes more sensitive to God's presence. Mary lived this attitude of gratitude fully. Her Magnificat, recited in the presence of Elizabeth, is a hymn of praise to divine providence that guided her life from childhood. Those who wish to live this devotion daily must learn to give thanks constantly, for a job, for food, for a friendship, for a moment of peace, for a small grace that often would pass unnoticed. Another essential point is the practice of charity. Devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence cannot be separated from care for one's neighbor. Mary did not think only of her own needs, but generously cared for others, especially the poorest and most vulnerable. The true devotee of this devotion must be able to transform faith into concrete works of love, a plate of food for someone in need, a visit to the sick, a word of consolation, a gesture of forgiveness, an act of generosity. Divine providence is not only something we receive, but something we are called to transmit. When we help someone, we become instruments of God's providence, and Mary rejoices deeply at this imitation of her maternal love. Trust in the Mother of Divine Providence also manifests itself in the acceptance of one's own history. Many people carry old wounds, traumas, regrets, or poorly made decisions that still cause pain today. Living this devotion means entrusting to Mary not only the present and the future, but also the past, allowing her to present everything to the merciful heart of God. Divine providence is not limited by time, and God is able to transform even the most painful memories into sources of healing. Mary wishes to envelop each faithful in her mantle and lead him to inner reconciliation so that he may live with freedom and serenity. When we allow her to enter our history, we experience the peace that only divine grace can offer. It is also important to cultivate a deep, sacramental life. Devotion to the Mother of Divine Providence does not replace the sacraments, but leads us to them with greater love and devotion. Mary always points us to Christ, especially in the Eucharist, where divine providence manifests itself in the most sublime way. Taking part in Mass, going to confession, praying before the Blessed Sacrament, and seeking a regular sacramental life strengthen the heart and open space for providence to act even more abundantly. Mary desires that her children live united to God's grace, and sacramental life is the safest path to remain under her maternal protection. Concluding this sixth part, we realize that living devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence in daily life is not something complicated or distant, but a lifestyle deeply rooted in Christian faith. It is learning to surrender, trust, give thanks, act, serve, wait, and interpret life in the light of God's loving presence. It is walking with the certainty that Mary accompanies us at every step, strengthens us in difficult moments, and always leads us to the heart of the Father. This devotion transforms worries into peace, doubts into confidence, and challenges into opportunities for spiritual growth. Whoever lives under Mary's gaze discovers that divine providence never fails, and that the Mother of Divine Providence is always ready to envelop us with her infinite care. Devotion to Our Lady of Divine Providence culminates in a deeply consoling truth. God does not abandon his children, and Mary is the visible sign of this eternal faithfulness. As we reach the end of this reflection, we realize that everything we have said up to this point converges on a single point. Divine providence, which acted in Mary's life with absolute perfection, continues to act today in the life of every faithful who surrenders to his love. This is not an abstract idea or a distant religious theory, but a living, concrete, and transforming reality. Providence manifests itself through simple events, important decisions, unexpected encounters, and even through sufferings that, at first glance, seem incomprehensible. Mary, as Mother of Divine Providence, walks beside her children and helps them interpret history in the light of God's eternal love. In contemplating Mary at the foot of the cross, we see the apex of her trust in divine providence. There, before the unimaginable suffering of seeing her innocent son die, she does not question, does not murmur, does not rebel. Her faith remains firm, silent, and completely surrendered to God's plan. This moment reveals the supreme strength of Marian trust. Even when everything seemed lost, she knew that God's will was being fulfilled. And this certainty sustained her soul. In invoking Our Lady of Divine Providence, we are invited to remain firm, also in the darkest moments, trusting that God is acting even when we cannot understand the purpose. Mary teaches us that true faith does not depend on circumstances, but on the absolute certainty that God's love never fails. Christ's resurrection is the ultimate proof of divine providence, transforming suffering into glory. Mary, who had remained faithful throughout the Passion, saw with her own eyes the definitive victory of love over death. This triumph illuminates the entire Christian life and strengthens those who, today, face deep sorrows and times of trial. Our Lady of Divine Providence reminds us that no cross is definitive, no pain is eternal, and no suffering is useless when placed in God's hands. The resurrection is the sign that divine providence directs all events, including the darkest ones, toward a conclusion of light. Thus, Mary invites us to see beyond the immediate and to believe that God is always working in our favor, even when everything seems to indicate the contrary. The figure of Our Lady of Divine Providence also reminds us that full trust in God needs to be continually renewed. It is not enough to trust once. It is necessary to trust every day, in each decision and in every circumstance. Mary, even after the resurrection, continued to live this trust in her daily life, caring for the disciples, strengthening the nascent church, consoling those who were afraid, and persevering in prayer in the upper room. She did not place herself in a position of prominence, but remained faithful to her role as servant, allowing divine providence to continue guiding every step. Thus, devotees of the Mother of Providence are called to renew their surrender daily, recognizing that faith is a continuous journey of loving abandonment. Looking at the history of the Church, we perceive that Our Lady of Divine Providence has always been present in the most difficult moments of the Christian people. In times of persecution, famine, wars, or spiritual crises, Mary appears as a sign of hope, as the one who points to Christ and reminds us that God is in control. Many saints have testified to her presence, finding in her strength, courage, and consolation. Saint Alphonsus Liguori, for example, used to say that Mary never abandons a child of hers who places himself under her protection. This certainty accompanied missionaries, martyrs, parents, religious and ordinary Christians throughout the centuries. Today, this same mother continues to act in the life of her people, guiding the church with love and interceding so that divine providence may manifest itself in all human realities. On a personal level, Our Lady of Divine Providence illumines our doubts, fears, and weaknesses with the gentleness of her maternal love. Many faithful testify that, upon entrusting their worries to Mary, they experience a deep and inexplicable peace. This peace is not the fruit of illusions or human optimism, but of the spiritual certainty that Mary truly presents our needs to God and obtains from Him the necessary graces for each situation. When we trust in the Mother of Providence, our heart is relieved, our mind is calmed, and our soul is strengthened. It is as if, in being embraced by Mary, the faithful could finally rest, knowing that they are safe in the arms of the One who governs all things. This devotion also invites us to entrust to God not only what is within our reach, but what we cannot resolve. There are situations in life that completely escape our control: serious illnesses, complex family problems, unexpected financial crises, irreversible decisions, painful losses. In these moments, the human soul feels powerless and vulnerable. The Mother of Divine Providence teaches us that true surrender is born precisely in these hours, when we recognize that only God can act. Mary leads us to the most profound act of trust: to give over that which hurts, that which surpasses us, and that which we do not understand, believing that God will transform everything into good. There is also a missionary dimension in this devotion. Those who trust in providence become a living witness of God's love. Mary, who lived this trust to the full, continues to inspire her devotees to be light in the world. When people see a Christian living with serenity even amid difficulties, they see the action of providence. When a faithful person is generous, patient, merciful, and trusting, he becomes a living instrument of divine grace. Our Lady of Divine Providence does not wish merely to ease our worries, but to shape in us a heart similar to hers, capable of radiating faith and hope to others. Thus, devotion is transformed into mission, to bring to the world the witness that God takes care of everything. The Mother of Divine Providence also teaches us that true surrender is only possible when we remain united to Jesus. Mary never sought her own glory. Everything she did was always directed to the Son. In the same way, devotion to providence must not lead us away from Christ, but bring us to Him with even greater love. It is before the Eucharist that providence reveals itself in its most sublime form, for there is present the very God who became food for us. Mary invites us to remain before Jesus with absolute trust, recognizing that He is the source of all grace, and that in Him we find the maternal mediation that leads us directly to His Sacred Heart. Concluding this seventh and final part, we come to the great conclusion of this spiritual journey. Our Lady of Divine Providence is the sure way to live fully the trust in God's eternal love. She teaches us to surrender, to wait, to give thanks, to act, to forgive, and to remain firm even when everything seems uncertain. Her maternal presence transforms the lives of those who invoke her and opens doors where there were only walls. Through her intercession, divine providence comes down upon us like a gentle rain that fertilizes the soul and renews hope. Whoever places himself under her mantle discovers that nothing is lacking because God provides everything at the right time. And Mary, the Mother who knows our needs even before we speak, continues to repeat in our heart, "Trust, my child, providence never fails."